Welcome back, everyone. This is the Oracle Decodes Time Travel, V for Vendetta, and the Hierophant. Daylight Savings Time, Part 2. We're going to start out in this piece tying some things together that we've been building upon in several previous pieces about what I've been calling this wink phenomenon, the real oracle or the all-seeing eye in the sky does, and how this connects to what is known as daylight savings time. So some previous decodings we've already done about this wink, the real all-seeing eye does, might help you in this piece to see things clearer. Those videos you can find on our channel and include the Oracle Eyes the Timeline Pirates, the Oracle Sees Through Masked Lies, the Oracle Decodes the Riddle of the Sphinx, the Oracle Decodes Halloween and the Legend of Sleepy Hollow, and finally the Oracle Decodes Abraham and Isaac, Child Sacrifice, and Daylight Savings Time. All right, so in this decoding, we're going to take a look at two very well-known by many people, two movies, one very obviously with a theme centered around time travel called Back to the Future, and another movie that is also very popular, and it also talks about the same time travel theme and the exact same time of the year, though I don't think anyone who's ever watched V for Vendetta had any idea that it was really about time travel too. So obviously for this decoding, it will help if you're at least familiar with the story in both of these movies, Back to the Future and V for Vendetta, that we're going to take a look at and connect. So in Back to the Future, let's start there. Marty McFly famously travels back in time to November 5th, 1955. And in V for Vendetta, V, in one of his most famous scenes in the movie, recites a poem before he blows up a building, the first time at least, in the film. The poem was, "Remember, remember, the 5th of November, the gunpowder treason and plot. I know of no reason why the gunpowder treason should ever be forgot." So what's the connection between this same date central in these two film plots, the 5th of November, and how is it that V in V for Vendetta is actually talking about time travel in the movie in the poem that he recites in the movie? Let's find out. The central character in V for Vendetta is V, the man who wears a Guy Fawkes mask. So let's start out at Wikipedia and find out what they have to tell us about the story of Guy Fawkes and why V would wear this mask in the film V for Vendetta. When you look up Guy Fawkes Night, also known as Bonfire Night and Fireworks Night on Wikipedia, you'll learn that it's celebrated on the 5th of November, primarily in the United Kingdom. Its history begins with the events of 1605, and by the way, that's on the Julian calendar, on the 5th of November, when Guy Fawkes, a member of the gunpowder plot, was arrested while guarding explosives that the plotters had placed beneath the House of Lords. The reasons given historically for the gunpowder plot that Guy Fawkes was involved in was because King James, the King of England and Scotland at the time, also think King James Bible. Well, King James was a Protestant king, and the gunpowder plot was a group of Pope-supporting Catholics who wanted the Protestant King James out of the House of Lords and replaced with a Pope-supporting Catholic king instead. Because the gunpowder plot that Guy Fawkes was a part of failed, people then celebrated King James surviving the attempt on his life by lighting bonfires around London, and then months later, the introduction of the observance of the 5th of November Act enforced an annual public day of Thanksgiving for the plot's failure, making 1605 the first year of the celebration, known by various names over time: Gunpowder Plot Night, Guy Fawkes Night, Bonfire Night, and Fireworks Night. The two latter connecting how the night was celebrated on the 5th of November later with bonfires and fireworks. At first, this celebration included a great deal of anti-Catholic sentiment among the people, where effigies of the Pope, for instance, were often placed on top of the bonfires and burned or sacrificed. This celebration was brought here to what we commonly call America by English settlers of the American colonies and continued until the American Revolutionary War. Over time, the celebration became less and less about any political or religious origins and much less anti-Catholic sentiment, specifically toward the Pope, was expressed. The last thing I want to point out here that Wikipedia mentions about Guy Fawkes Night is under the heading of similarities with other customs, where it says, historians have often suggested that Guy Fawkes Day served as a Protestant replacement for ancient Celtic and pagan festivals, like Samhain. And Samhain, by the way, is an ancient lord of darkness. Pagan festivals like All Hallows Eve and All Souls Day, it goes on to say. But one author that is cited by Wikipedia in reference to this observation, David Creasy, says that believing Gunpowder Plot Night or Guy Fawkes Night is celebrated for any other reason other than King James surviving the attempt on his life is, quote, speculative nonsense. But in this decoding, we're about to prove those historians who saw the connection to Halloween and Guy Fawkes Night right, and those who call that speculative nonsense wrong. We're going to start out here with a screenshot from Stellarium again to get a look up at what I call the real oracle or the real all-seeing eye in the sky, choosing a northern hemisphere perspective on the ground to look up at it on the date we commonly call October 30th of 2020. The day before Halloween at midnight is where we're starting. And remember, it's this time of the year that the real oracle or the real all-seeing eye we discovered winks again, just like it does we discovered in the spring. These winks the real oracle or the real all-seeing eye does causes the need, as we've learned, for what is known as daylight savings time in certain parts of the world. And the beginning and the ending of it in the spring and in the fall, we've already started to take a look at. Now, we've also been decoding the major arcana cards of the tarot deck in many of our previous decodings, and in the last video specifically, we left off with the number 4 card, the Emperor. Now, the next in order in the tarot deck is going to tie in here, the number 5 card, the Hierophant, also known as the Pope. And as you'll see here, it's going to synchronistically and beautifully tie together. Wink, wink. So before we go forward, let's just take a quick look back to the summer solstice time of year as the tarot deck encodes the sky clock story to start there. And notice that next in order from where we left off in the tarot deck continues to sync up with this sky story, where after Aries the Ram, or the Emperor, in the summer solstice sky story along the western arc of the ecliptic, we saw that corresponds to the number 4, the Emperor card. So we should expect that the number 5 card, the Hierophant, or the Pope, should correspond to what's next in order in the sky story picture. And it does. As you can see, the Hierophant, or the Pope, is card number 5, or V in Roman numerals, and it encodes for the constellation next, along the western arc of the ecliptic, shaped just like a big V, as we've seen in other decodings, the constellation of Pisces, the 2 fishes. So take a look at the number 5, or V in Roman numerals card of the tarot deck, the Hierophant, or the Pope. And let's look at the symbols shown to us on the card. The background of the card is gray, because at this time of the year you can see the Hierophant, or the Pope, or Pisces, in the sky story, is not with the light of the sun at this time, but not yet in the dark realm of the underworld either. He's in between the 2 pillars, in a grayer area, above the western horizon of the earth at high noon on the summer solstice, but will be shortly on its way, Pisces will, to descend into the horizon of the earth, which is one of the 3 crosses that you can see symbolically represented on the Hierophant's or the Pope's robe, with 3 crosses on his robe and a triple-crossed staff that he holds, also a 3-tiered crown that he wears. All of these 3 crosses are encoding for the overall shape of the triangle that Pisces makes in the sky, but also these 3 crossing points are where Pisces, or the Pope, rise above the eastern horizon of the earth makes its way to the cross of the north-south meridian line and the arc of the ecliptic. And then the third special crossing point would be the crossing point into the western horizon of the Earth, where Pisces, or the Hierophant, is about to descend. There are also two men in front of the Hierophant on the tarot card with what look like gold V's or Y's on their back. The Pope is holding up two fingers on his hand, and there are two crossed keys at his feet, a familiar symbol going along with the Catholic Church and the Pope both. All encoding these symbols, you can see, for when you look at the constellation of Pisces, for the way that it's shaped in the sky. That big V in the sky of the two fishes, looking just like those two crossed keys. So now that we've decoded who the Hierophant or the Pope represents in the sky story, let's see now how this ties into what you didn't know before, that V for Vendetta story is really telling, but are now finding out. So back to the time of year that in both of these films in the modern day, Back to the Future and V for Vendetta, encode for. It's that time of the year that's right around Halloween, the time of the second wink or the fall wink that the real all-seeing eye in the sky does. And it's also that second mark point of daylight savings time. So let's start where we find the Hierophant or the Pope, that number 5 or V in Roman numerals card, where it's located on what we commonly call October 30th of 2020 at midnight. We can find the Pope, the Hierophant, right at the cross of the north-south meridian line and the arc of the ecliptic. And we learned already that Guy Fawkes was pro-Pope, which we were told, remember, was the reason for his being involved in the gunpowder plot to get rid of or sacrifice the Protestant King James. And it's the reason that the vexing and vicious vaudevillian hero villain wears a Guy Fawkes mask and calls himself V. All of this encodes, you can see, for the constellation of Pisces, shaped like a Roman numeral 5 and a big V in the sky story picture. And don't those two crossed swords on the movie poster for V for Vendetta look just like those two crossed keys of the Hierophant or the Pope on the tarot card too? Now tie in that V recites his poem about the 5th of November, or the Roman numeral 5 of November as well. Remember, the 5th of November, the gunpowder treason and plot. I know of no reason why the gunpowder treason should ever be forgot. Even the way the Guy Fawkes mask looks encodes for the sky story we're looking at. The mask, like we've seen before when we've decoded, for instance, Dorona, once again corresponds to Cetus the whale, right below Pisces. The long nose of Cetus, a direct correspondence to the long nose of the mask. The upturned smile is the bottom part of Cetus, looking to the storytellers here like a mouth in a smile. The handlebar mustache corresponding again to Pisces because of its position to Cetus and the way that it's shaped. And those thick eyebrows corresponding to the constellation of Aries, just above the head of Cetus there, Aries the ram, which we've seen before when decoding the Eye of Ra and the Eye of Horus from ancient Egypt, was also that eye's eyebrow as well. And not to mention, we're also seeing why this time of year also corresponds with people dressing up and wearing masks for Halloween. So let's go forward in the sky story to Halloween at midnight and take a look at how this ties in to Back to the Future. The main character, Marty McFly, is also encoding for, as you can see, right in his name, the same combination of Pisces and Cetus that we've already seen previously in our ancient Egyptian decodings. The ancient Egyptians called this combination the baby falcon or hawk-headed god Horus, because to them it looked both like a baby and a hawk or a falcon in flight. The spread wings being the constellation of Pisces, as you can see. But in Back to the Future, this Pisces-Cetus combination is Marty McFly, the star of the Back to the Future show. And he's right at the cross of the north-south meridian line in the arc of the ecliptic at midnight on Halloween. Now connect this, Marty McFly in the film, a connection again represented by the constellation of Eridanus the River, tying it to the combination of Auriga, Taurus, and our old friend Orion again. This same sky story combination we saw as both Brom Bones in the legend of Sleepy Hollow and Abraham from the Bible. Stories also encoding for daylight savings time, and what I call the wink that the real all-seeing eye does. This Auriga-Taurus-Orion combination in Back to the Future is the genius scientist who made Marty McFly time travel, and his name is Doc Brown. When Marty travels back to November 5th, 1955, and he arrives at Doc Brown's house, Doc answers the door in this mind-reading device that he invented, or Taurus, with the combination of Orion, is wearing the crown of Auriga. And remember, it's also at this point in the movie that Marty has to convince Doc that he is from the future, and he does so by recalling a story that Doc told Marty about the day, which was that day, that he invented time travel, when Doc was standing on his toilet, hanging a clock, fell and slipped his head, and woke up and invented time travel. That clock is also Auriga doing double duty that Doc Brown was trying to hang when he fell, slipped, and hit his head. So to get Marty back to the future from 1955, remember it was a modified DeLorean car with pop-up open doors. This also encodes for the same Pisces-Cetus constellation combination again, because as you can see of the way that it's shaped. The Pisces, you can see, was reimagined to be the pop-up doors on the car of Cetus. Now remember that this DeLorean must use harnessed lightning back in 1955 to get Marty back to the future again. And they already know how to get this harnessed lightning from what they know will happen soon in the 1955 future to get Marty McFly in the time-traveling DeLorean back to the year 1985. The lightning they harness, remember, strikes the clock tower in exactly 7 days from when Marty McFly arrived in 1955 on the 5th of November, or the Roman numeral 5, shaped just like a V. So going forward here to the next day, so we continue to watch what's going on in the sky story during this time of the year, we're at now what we commonly call November 1st at midnight. And it's what we still expect to see, right? That incremental movement of everything we're tracking in the sky story, moving just a little bit more westward along its journey than where everything was found the midnight before. Now remember that if daylight savings time is observed because of decreasing daylight hours during this time of year in your geographical area on Earth, like it has been for many years in much of what we commonly call America, it's not always observed on the same calendar date every year. In the spring, the clock springs ahead 1 hour on the second Sunday of what we commonly call March, and it ends in the fall when the clocks fall back an hour on the first Sunday in November. So, as you can see, it's not always the same calendar date these marks fall on. But this year, in what we commonly call 2020, the first Sunday of November occurs the day after Halloween. That's the daylight savings time mark this year. And it's part of what the real all-seeing eye, or the real oracles, wink. It's seen when we look at midnight on what we commonly call November 1st, where we see something unexpected from the night before. On our clocks, it's because the time was moved back 1 hour, but this shifts forward or jumps to the future or time travels everything we're tracking in the sky story forward. So the clock jumps back an hour to the past, but the sky story jumps ahead to the future. And what happens in the movie, right, for Marty McFly, as Cetus Pisces found the night before to be right at the cross of the north-south meridian line in the arc of the ecliptic, well, Marty's time traveled to the future in the sky story and is almost completely past the cross of the north-south meridian line in the arc of the ecliptic here in one big jump. So now let's tie in V, from the V from Vendetta film and everything we've seen so far to the 5th of November then at midnight in the sky story. Because now, as we know, that first Sunday of November marking daylight savings time in the fall can fall on any date from the time of Halloween to 7 days later, the 5th of November at the latest. So we could call this then, couldn't we, the fall week of the wink? So it's on this date that we commonly call 2020 of November 5th at midnight, where you'll find the entire constellations of both Pisces and Cetus now completely to the west side of that special crossing point of the north-south meridian line and the arc of the ecliptic. And one more thing to note about what's really encoded in Back to the Future is that remember that Marty must get to the speed to time travel in the DeLorean up to 88 miles an hour. And that corresponds to the currently mapped known constellations in the celestial space that total in number 88. As for V, well, that's why we took so much time with the Guy Fawkes story at the beginning, because some of the same time travel week V for Vendetta encodes for too is more masked than what is to be taken at face value. Wink, wink. But you'll find some obvious clues when you now see with clearer vision. In V for Vendetta, the viewer is shown the clock. And doesn't that look very similar to the clock tower found in Back to the Future, right? When the clock strikes midnight on the 5th of November, V recites his 5th of November poem about the gunpowder plot before blowing up that first building. So now let's take a closer look at this gunpowder plot V's poem and many elements in the story of V for Vendetta are in reference to and what it's really encoding for. The first thing to decode on the date with the V of Pisces corresponding to the 5 or the V in the 5th of November. But take a look at where the gunpowder plot looks like in what happened in 1605 with the combination of the constellations of Cetus and Pisces. You can see the 1 for the one fish of Pisces, the 6 for the other, the head of Cetus for the 0, and the entire constellation in the way that it's shaped, the 5. Take a look also at the barrel of explosives or fireworks that were reimagined by the storytellers here because, again, of the way that Pisces is shaped to be those explosives or the fireworks that Guy Fawkes' night was later celebrated with. And remember, it was also the pro-pope or the pro-hierophant of the tarot card, Catholics, that Guy Fawkes and his crew were trying to assassinate the Protestant King James. Tied to the constellation combo again of Pisces and Cetus by Eridanus the River again, to our old friend Orion, or King James in this story. Crowned, Orion always is, by Auriga. Auriga is doing double roles again. It's also the clock tower on the Parliament building, or House of Lords, that Guy Fawkes and his crew of pro-pope assassins failed at their plot to blow up. But hundreds of years later, in the future, from the original 1605 story of the 5th of November, V, in his Guy Fawkes mask, on the 5th of November succeeds in blowing up the Parliament building in the UK in the dystopic future setting that is even in the future from when V for Vendetta was released. This is real time traveling that we're doing here. So on the 5th of November in the movie V for Vendetta, as we move ahead just 2 more hours from midnight, we get to the part in the end of the film where V, the vexing vaudevillian villain, has met his terminal end, his death, where he's put on a red subway train full of explosives headed underneath the House of Lords, as it was known in 1605, or the Parliament building in the futuristic dystopic UK in the V for Vendetta film. And as you can see, this corresponds with what we're watching in the Sky story now, which is the combination of Cetus and Pisces going down like a subway train into the western horizon of the Earth. Going ahead 3 more hours in the Sky story on what we commonly call the 5th of November, we watch how V for Vendetta ends, with V's explosive train already on the way to Parliament as a huge mass of people, all in Guy Fawkes masks as well, all descend upon the same viewing location to watch the coming fireworks display that will be from the Parliament building about to be blown up. As you can see, the masked masses corresponds to the head of the constellation of Cetus that's only visible now because the rest of the body of the constellation of Cetus has already descended or has been masked by the horizon of the Earth. And 1/2 of the constellation of Pisces, representing those explosive fireworks, has already traveled by subway train underground. And just to make sure we're getting our decoding right, the storytellers in V for Vendetta made sure to give you a good long shot of the exploding clock tower on the Parliament building, so you would know we're talking about the real sky clock story, and that this is a story about time travel, where we fall back an hour, but jump ahead to the future. Or in other words, we sacrifice time to save an hour of daylight on our clocks in the fall. We're moving ahead now to the dawn, just as the sun is rising over the eastern horizon of the Earth on the 5th of November. And in V for Vendetta, as the Parliament building blows up, the people watching take off their Guy Fawkes masks to watch. They're watching the fireworks show, and the last firework that we see will be in the shape of a V. Now, the people that are unmasking, you can see, is corresponding again to the head of Cetus going down almost completely descended into the western horizon of the Earth. And then Pisces being fully descended with it, while at the same time over the eastern horizon, the firework or the bonfire that is the sun is about to light up the sky overhead. And it's also why, starting in 1605, to celebrate Guy Fawkes Night, effigies of the Pope were put on top of the bonfires to burn or sacrifice. So as we end this piece, take a look again at the movie poster for Back to the Future, and take a look at Marty McFly's flaming tire tracks left by his time-traveling DeLorean. Now you know why they are in flames and why they are shaped in an upside-down V. And remember, when Marty gets back to the future, his flaming time-traveling tire tracks have him crashing into a movie theater 7 days after he arrived in the past in 1955 on Remember, the 5th of November. I think that's a great place to end this piece, and we'll do it again in the future, as we have in the past, when we pick it back up in our next decoding. Until then, be well.